Hello there, my name is Sean Leroy Hansen, also known as Ledev, and we're on to what I would say is the final day of them revealing spoilers, at least the day before they reveal the official list. So we're missing like around less than 50 cards. I think I'm going to save those cards for just a set review in general, but we did got some cards revealed today, so it'll be nice to say my 2 cents on them. Nevertheless, let's start off with a very peculiar green pump spell. Excuse me. The spell is Dadiva do Podo. 4 and 2 green for a instant spell. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Repeat it 3 times, that's what the spell does. Overall, this can be potentially very powerful limited card. Like, I wouldn't say it's a pack one pick one per se, but if you can build the right deck where pumping your creatures +3/+3 can be very beneficial, that can help finish games sometimes, especially if you have creatures with flying, trample, etc., etc. Plus, at worst, it can be used as a combat trick, a very predictable combat trick, but a combat trick nevertheless. So, Unlimited, I say it's close to a bomb, but you need to put it in the right deck. In Constructed, there is the temptation to use this to try to get Galtra out for cheap, but if you're using this spell to do that, in theory, you would be getting Galtra out by turn 8 with 8 mana, so what's the point? But still, having Galtra out and then pumping it 3 times with this spell is kind of tempting, though. Overall, it's simple. It's a pump spell that might be a little bit predictable, but the power level is definitely there. Good and limited. It'll be interesting to see if this goes into Constructed. The 6 mana is costly, though. Just saying that right off the bat. Next up, the Hellkite Whelp. 4 and a red for a free flying dragon. Whenever it attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature defending player controls. Overall, just a very fine limited card. It's a nice flyer. 5 mana for a free flyer does feel a little bit costly, but it's a flyer. It's evasive, and also this can get bigger in red if you have Minter and such, so that's a possibility. And dealing 1 damage to a target creature defending player controls can help you with combat, potentially if you're attacking with multiple creatures. But also can kill tokens as well, so that's actually pretty cool. There are some times where there's going to be some board states where this is going to be very unimpressive, but there are times where this could actually be very beneficial to your overall game plan. Plus, it's a dragon, and people like playing with dragons. So, in Constructed, yeah, there's a lot better dragons in the format, and I don't think this effect is very beneficial in limited. I mean, not limited, blah, in standard, because, well, Goblin Chain Whirler. Enough said on that one. Overall, though, great limited card. I wouldn't say it's an absolute bomb, but it's a really good card. Next up, Chamber Sentry. Oh, how far Walking Ballista has fallen. X mana for a 0/0. Chamber the Sentry enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. You spend X and tap to remove X 1/1 counters from Chamber Sentry. It deals X damage to any target. And then you can spend all the colors of the MTG Rainbow to return Chamber Sentry from your graveyard to your hand. Whew, I was scared when I first read this card. I thought it was just going to be the return of a Ballista-like card again, which scared me. But it turns out this card is not as bad as Ballista for a few reasons. One, you have to tap it to actually get the damage base effect. Plus, you have to spend mana into it, which in Ballista, all you had to do was remove the counters to do the damage. So, significant power downgrade just by that in general. Plus, the factor that for this to be more effective, you need to be in a 5-color deck does make this card very costly, and thankfully, Trats players don't have access to it. Phew. But still, in Limited, I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not great. I mean, it's one of those rares that someone might just pack one, pick one this, and try to go into 5-color good stuff. And if you try that, good luck. It should be a blast, and this card is not a bad payoff in Limited. In Constructed, I mean, if there's a purpose for casting a spell for 0, maybe. Maybe this is a way you can do that, and then just for later game, use it as just a 2-2 or how big it can get. It depends on if a 5-color deck exists in Standard, which, possibility is there, but I highly doubt it. Overall, I think it's a bad limited card. It's not horrible, but you really need to be in a specific deck for this to be mostly effective. And in Standard, I don't see it. Maybe in Commander, maybe this is where this card's main play is. Maybe in Commander and Brawl for 5-color shenanigan decks. Which, if that's the case, get at it. You'll probably have some fun with it. It's not Ballista, and to be frank, with how much we've seen Ballista in Standard, I do not mind that this is not a Ballista. Next up, one of the cutest arts ever, because Kitty, generous stray, 2 and a green for a creature cat. Whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Honestly, this is just a 23rd limited card. If you need a free drop, and you really need a free drop to help with your curve, there's worse options. Plus, the factor is the stats is kind of the main weakness to this card. Being a 1-2 is... But honestly, you're just paying for the draw card ability, so it's a cantrip. So free mana for a 1-2 that cantrips, I've seen worse. But on the other hand side of the coin, I also seen cards like, I don't know, 2-drops that are 1-1s that draw cards when they enter the battlefield. So, yeah. I think it's just mostly going to see its play in Limited. In Standard, probably not, unless somebody wants to do a very janky cat travel deck. But still, the art is kind of adorable, and who knows, maybe if someone has the EDH cat deck, you can at least have this as an option if you need a cantrip in your deck. Overall, though, mostly it's going to see its play in Limited, and probably just people buying the art because that art is actually pretty cool. Next up, the Inspiring Unicorn. 2 and 2 white for a 2-2 unicorn, so 4 mana for a unicorn. What does this unicorn do other than being very majestic with its art? Whenever it attacks, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Boy, this is pretty spicy and limited if you have the right deck. Like, if you are a go wide deck, this card can be very powerful very quick. And even if you're a mid-range deck in limited, keep in mind I'm saying limited here, this card can be potentially very powerful. Like in wide decks, getting that buff can get the power level to this card to be kind of absurd. Plus, it buffs itself, which is nice. But it's also decent in a mid-range deck, because if even 2 creatures get the +1/+1 buff, or free creatures, including the unicorn, that's not bad. I mean, it's not amazing. It's still prone to removal, so keep that in mind. But it is a card to build around, I'll say that. Plus, it's just a really good limited card. Standard, if somebody wants to make the unicorn gimmick deck, go at it. But I don't think it's playable in Standard. Just that low stats in general, even for that technical benefit, it dies to a lot of removal in the format. I'm just going to put it like that. Still, I think this is mostly just for play in Limited, especially in certain decks that would like this type of effect. Overall, good Limited card. Probably not much constructed play unless you're the guy that plays the Unicorn deck. Or gal. Next up, Camaraderie. 4 green and a white for a sorcery spell. You gain Et's life and draw Et's cards, where Et's is the number of creatures you control. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Boy, I both love this card and I don't like this card at the same time. On one hand, the art is gorgeous, and what the card does is really cool. The factor that it's kind of Green's take on... I am forgetting the Azoria spell that is Et's and blue and a white, and some blue and white mana to draw Et's cards and gain Et's life. It's kind of nice to see Selesnya kind of get their own variation of that spell that interacts with creatures, which is kind of the main strength with this card. If you're in a creature-based deck that likes to go wide or have a lot of creatures on the battlefield, this spell is legit. I can see this seeing Commander play, no sweat about that, because that effect to gain Et's life and draw Et's cards, and also the temporary buff and token-based decks, is absurd. In Limited, you need to put this in the right deck. I wouldn't say this is like a pack one, pick one per se. The temptation is there, don't get me wrong. But I think this is more a good pack 2 pick one once you know you're in Selesnya tokens or Selesnya go wide shenanigans. Then this card becomes legitimately cool and limited. Constructed in Standard, maybe the problem is 6 mana is a lot, but. And the problem is we are going to go into a meta with a lot of board wipes, so that can be costly. I don't know. I don't think you'll see Standard play. There is the potential it could if there are ways to give your creatures indestructible to make sure you can keep them alive until this effect. But we don't have that many ways to give our creatures indestructible, at least at the moment, so. At least with the standard rotation, so yeah. Overall, though, really good art. Nice card for Commander, and even Brawl. I will be surprised to see standard play, and in limited, in the right decks, it's fine. Next up, a really interesting new elf we get, the Pelt Collector. A 1 mana 1/1 elf warrior, and whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield or dies, if that creature's power is greater than Pelt Collector's, put a 1/1 counter on Pelt Collector. As long as Pelt Collector has 3 or more 1/1 counters on it, it has trample. Okay, let's get to Limited. Limited, this is not exactly a bomb, but it is an interesting card to brew around. Because this is not a bad 1-drop, and if you're in kind of like a good curve deck where there's a 2-drop that's bigger, and then a 3-drop, 4-drop, 5-drop, in theory, if you can keep this alive, you'll get more counters, and when even those creatures die that have bigger toughness, and then this one still has lower toughness, then it still get a counter. This could become a significant threat pretty quick, depending on your average game of Commander. The only catch, though, with this, and it's the catch that I'm kind of a little bit on, completely honest, it's the factor that, in some ways, other than the creatures entering the battlefield, if this is getting bigger by creatures dying, chances are you're not doing good in the game. And I don't know if this, even as big as it can be, even the fact that it can get trample, can be a significant enough threat to help you come back. It's definitely intimidating, especially when it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. No denying that. But the question is, by the methods in which is this going to get bigger, is that going to be you having a board state advantage or not having a board state advantage? That's kind of the main question with this card. In Constructed, it has potential. Especially in decks like maybe aristocratic style decks or decks that can find other ways to put counters on it. There is that temptation, though we are going in a removal centric meta, so that's something to consider. Though would be interesting to see if elf players want to play with this card. I don't know if they would, but it's a thought. Overall, I think this is not a fine limited card. I don't know if it's a pack one pick one per se, but it's a good card if you're going into these colors to pick up pretty quick. Next up, it's, in Standard, I don't see it, but Modern, maybe. Next up is Alba de Esperanza, 1 white for an enchantment. I need to remember what this does. Okay, now I remember. The Dawn of Hope. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 2 mana. If you do, draw a card, and then 3 and a white to create a 1/1 white social creature token with lifelink. Wow. You can tell it's a little late at night for me doing this because I'm kind of being gibberish on some of these pronunciations. Overall, though, this card is fine. Like, this is going to be a great EDH card if you have any life gain style type of decks. The fact that you have the mana sink, both in the factor that you can spend 2 mana to draw a card, and the factor that you can do mana sink to create a token that has lifelink, which then synergizes with the first part of the enchantment, that's really cool. I mean, this is a really cool card. I wouldn't say it's a pack one pick one in limited, but it's tempting at the very least, especially if you can go into the Selesnya, create a bunch of lifelink tokens, and then dig deep into your deck. That's very tempting. I'm not going to lie about that, for limited at the very least. Standard, it really is dependent on if the meta is slow enough for a 2-cost enchantment to be played that will have this life gain effect that people would want to sink the mana into. I'm going to say no, but there is potential. In Brawl and Commander, absolutely. Mono white decks might like this card a lot, especially if they focus a lot on life gain synergies. Overall, this is probably just a really good Commander card. And maybe toy and limited in the right deck archetypes, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Next up, the standard, hey, we gotta make one card to encourage mill archetypes. Drown Secrets, 1 in a blue for another 2-cost enchantment, which is whenever you cast a blue spell, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So remember, it's target player, so if your strategy indicates it, you could actually mill yourself, which could be beneficial. This is weird because in Commander, this card is kind of ass since you do have to target a player. It's not like each opponent mills a card. You do have to target a player, which does make the milling a teeny bit slow in retrospect. But I think this is more a potential constructed card. Thanks to cards with like Search for Azcanta and such, I think Wizards is starting to realize that 2-cost enchantments are enchantments that we don't mind to invest in and such for specific effects. 3-cost enchantments are a little bit too costly, but 2-cost we don't mind that much. So okay, sorry, I was just seeing something here. Anyway, what was I thinking? Oh yeah, sorry, just a message on kind of like Xbox Live and such. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So whenever you cast a blue spell, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into the graveyard. Overall, this will be an interesting effect to see if mill decks like to take advantage of this, because there is a lot of cheap blue spells, and there is a potential that you can make kind of like a blue stack mill deck where you cast a lot of spells and maybe you cast multiple instances of those spells, which then can help you mill a lot, and then there are the cards like Homeworld Explorer to help mill. I don't know if there's enough to make a mill deck possible in Standard, but the thought's still there. Also, there is the fact that this could just be a fuel for graveyard decks, like maybe you have graveyard synergies that you need to fuel, and this is a card that can do it as long as you have a majority of blue spells. In Limited, I think this is kind of a dud rare. I mean, there are some times where this card can be very beneficial in Sealed or Limited, but don't bet the farm on it, I'll say that. Overall, though, I think this is a fun constructed card, though. Next up, Gargola Guardiana, 6 mana for a free flyer, and it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each gate you control. Overall, really dependent if you have a lot of gates. If you have a lot of gates, this card's really good. If you don't, then the card's fine. I would cut this out pretty quick because sure, it's a flyer, but spending 6 mana for just a free flyer, that feels bad. In Constructed, if a gate deck exists, maybe, but I highly doubt that they would play this, or there will probably be other ways that gate decks will try to win besides this. Overall, though, interesting card. Next up, Trasgul Selagelo, which I think it's Goblin Lockpicker, if I remember correct. 2/1. When this creature attacks, I think it's either target creature with Defender can't block, or creatures with Defender can't block, if I remember correct. So, yeah, it's creatures with Defender can't block this turn. Okay, overall, now that I remember it's all creatures with Defender can't block, it's very dependent. I'd say that this is just in Limited. It's a Piker that has a little bit of upside against some certain archetypes. I wouldn't bet the whole farm on it, per se, but it's not a bad card. It's a 2 mana 2/1, and you play a Piker if you need to in Limited. There are times where you're going to play Pikers. That's just the rule of Limited in general. And the fact that you can block with this, it's fine. In Standard and Constructed, I mean, if you need another 2-drop Goblin for a Goblin deck, I've seen worser options, but I also seen better options like Mogwar Marshal and such, but who knows, maybe sideboard playing Goblin decks? If you're going against a Defender deck in Standard, if that's ever a thing? Maybe? Overall, though, probably just a fine Limited card as a 2-drop. Next up, Defuda Plagas. 2 and a black for an uncommon human cleric, I think it is, or human shaman. It's a free 2, and when it enters the battlefield, it's either target or each. I need to make sure. Each play... Oh, yeah, it's like Flashbug Marauder. Each player sacrifices either a creature or Planeswalker, and if they can't, they have to discard a card. Overall, this card is good. This card might see some sideboard play in Constructed to help go against Teferi-style decks, because that effect is very powerful. Especially, it's a way to essentially help counteract Teferi-like decks, which is potentially very powerful. In Limited, this is just fine in the right decks. If you have sacrifice-based synergies or aristocratic-style synergies, and even worst case scenario, you can just sack this self as a free cost removal spell. Yeah, Punisher removal, so the opponent is going to choose the less of worse options, but there are times in board states where this is really beneficial for you. Overall, really good uncommon. I would say play this in Limited, no sweat about that, especially in the right deck archetypes. In Standard, I can see a potential sideboard play and to go against certain archetypes. Next up, Podo le Masas. It's a 1 mana instant spell. Target creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. We've seen these spells like before. It's a combat trick in the right decks, and sometimes combat tricks are necessary for your overall game plan. It's fine. It's a legitimately fine card. In constructed, if a go wide deck or a mini creature mid range deck is a thing, then you could probably use this as a good trick. Though, keep in mind, we are in a meta where the removal is destroy target creature shenanigans, not like deal free damage, deal 4 damage, or such. I mean, we can if you're going against a lot of majority of red decks in your meta and such, so this might be just a good sideboard card in general since we're losing stuff like Ranger's Guile and all that stuff, or Blossoming Defense. The thought's still there, but overall, great limited combat trick. Just know when you need to pick it if you're in this deck archetype. Next up, Tropaz Vastas, 1 in Gagari colors, green and a black, for a zombie soldier that's a 2/2, and you can discard a creature card and give it +2/+2 and trample. You can only activate this ability once each turn. Honestly, this is just a fine common. It's a fine common for limited if you just need ways to feed creature cards into your graveyard. I mean, paying free mana for a 2/2 does feel bad, but the fact that you can, if I recall correct, you don't, this ability is not sorcery speed. Yeah, it's not sorcery speed, so you can do combat tricks with that discard card ability to help remove some of the opponent's creatures and such, like in weird trades and such, which is very powerful. So in Limited, I think this is a fine, like, 23rd to even just a good free drop in Limited in general, especially if you're in the deck archetype that doesn't mind discarding creature cards in their graveyard. In Standard, I don't know if you'll see play in Standard. Maybe Popper, because that effect could be good in Oubliette-style decks. That's a thought. Or like Tormented Voice-style decks that need another discard engine. It's a thought. But overall, it's just a really good limited card in general. Like, not the best limited card in the world, but if you're in this Gagari creature, put stuff in the graveyard shenanigans, it's fine. Next up, Experimental Frenzy. 3 and a red for an enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play the top card of your library. You can't play cards from your hand, and you can spend 3 and a red to destroy this enchantment. Turns out coffee is the weird ant of invention. Or more in general, caffeine, even if it's sugar pill caffeine in general, is the weird ant of all invention. And yes, did I time that? Yes. Overall, though, this is a good card. This is a potentially interesting card. I mean, in Commander, the obvious play is in Sedru-style decks that like to donate this to their opponents to make it their lives a lot more trickier since they have to hope that they can play the cards on the top of their deck. That's kind of a no-brainer in Commander. Now, in Standard Constructed, this is where the card's interesting. This is a potential play in, say, aggro red decks, because the factor is you're going to empty your hand out pretty quick, and if you can play this enchantment to hopefully be able to get more fuel from your deck, that thought is pretty tempting. However, and this is the biggest however, there are times where this card is going to be dead because you draw like 2 lands, or like you reveal land, play that land, and then you see another land on the top of your deck, which then makes the card pretty costly. However, there are ways to get around this, like maybe if you use Evolving Wilds, Field of Ruins, or have cards that you can play, hopefully on the top of the library, or like as lands to shuffle or be able to mill a card. And if you have those type of cards, that can actually make this a lot more effective. This is one of those weird brew me around cards, but I think it might be just good as a top end for a red aggro deck, potentially. It's definitely one that's going to be very experimental, and it's going to cause some frenzy. Ba-da-dun-da-da-dun. Done. Okay, next up is a split card. Flower to Flourish. Flower. Hybrid mana for green and white. Search your library for a basic forest of plains and put it onto the bat. Or, not that. Nope, that would actually make this a lot more better. Search for that card, reveal it, and then put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And then there's Flourish, which is 4 green and a white. To creatures you control, get +2/+2 until end of turn. Honestly, this is just a fine limited card. I mean, we all have that time once in a while where we have the really, really bad game where we draw our Cultivate very late game in Commander, and then the card is kind of a dead card because we might not have any more basic lands in our deck, so it's just a very awkward dead card. So this is kind of a way to go around about that. The factor is, if you're early game that you don't mind getting that forest or plains from your deck, there you go. Play Flower, get that land, don't have to worry, shuffle your library for consistency's sakes. And then late game, when that card's a little bit more dead, then cast Flourish, which then is not a bad spell. I mean, maybe sometimes you can use this as a finisher to give your creatures a big boost to help you get in for a lethal kill and such. So, or make a very awkward combat circumstance. So, there is potential, and the factor is I do really love the legitimate design of these cards. How it's like, one side you can use it in certain circumstances, and the other side you'll use it in another set of circumstances. This is legitimately cool design, how they're doing with these split cards. Overall, very fine card for limited. It might see some play in Commander, Standard. If people really need a 1-mana search for a land type spell and they don't mind wasting their turn 1 on it or turn 2 or free, then it might see play. Maybe. But the factor that you do search for a basic forest or basic plans does hurt the card a teeny little bit. Though, it's not a bad card. Next up, a really good card for Boros. Tajik, Legion, Tajik. I always do not know how to pronounce this guy. Tajik, Legion's Edge, 1 in Boros colors for a legendary creature, Human Soldier. It's a free 2 with haste. Mentor, when it ever attacks with a 1/1 counter, we all know what Mentor does. But the best effect here is prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. Okay, that's really good. And then red and a white, it gets first strike until end of turn. Okay, this card is both really good, and it's also kind of has some quirks. Now, on one hand, being able to prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control, that's nice against like board wipes or against spot removal that deals like damage, like deal free, like lightning strike, shocks, and all that. However, I think people are going to make the mistake when they read this card and forget that this is non-combat damage. So when you get into combat, that damage is not going to be prevented. So there's going to be some creatures that people are going to not mind blocking because they think, oh, the damage's not going to be dealt. But then they realize, oh, wait, the damage is going to be dealt. Oh, no. And then lose some games just by that. So keep in mind, non-combat damage. Non-combat damage. Non-combat damage. Okay, we good on that? We good. But overall, just the free mana for a free 2 haste with Mentor is fine enough, especially since you can do a mana sink in it to give it first strike. That's really good. Plus, also, this might actually just make Boros aggro potentially a Feign, because this is just a really, really well-designed free drop. Now, keep in mind that non-combat damage clause, as I mentioned before, and don't fall for the trap, but there is also potential that this could be prone to removal, especially with all the removal we're getting that's currently in Standard, and it's going to become part of Standard, so it might see play, might not. We have to wait and see. Path of Metal, though, does make this card really tempting. Overall, great limited bomb, and it's probably going to see some Standard play. Don't fall for the factor that non-combat damage. Remember, that's not preventing damage in combat. Okay, we're good, we're good. Next up, Electrostatic Field. 1 in a red for a creature walled with Defender. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Well, if we wanted to make a Is It Spell deck thing a Feign, this might be a good catalyst for that. I mean, if we could find a way to cast multiple spells and be able to just ping the opponent off, that's kind of how a majority of these really good Is It spell type of decks work in previous formats. They get out a cheap creature that has this effect, and then they cast a lot of cantrip spells, and then just a lot of cheap burn spells, which then hopefully over time deals enough damage to overall kill the opponent. Those decks, while been gimmicky and niche in some formats, have been actually pretty powerful in some standard blocks, so the fact that we have this card currently in standard is something to keep in mind. So, in limited, it's a fine card. If you definitely played it, Is It Spells deck, it's good as a blocker to help keep you from aggro, and just doing that little points of damage little bit by little bit each time you cast it into sorcery will add up, especially if you're in a spell-centric Is It style deck. Overall, not a bad card for limited, but it does have some standard construction potential that I can't wait to see come out. Okay, one of the more absurd and powerful EDH cards they revealed, Mnemonic Betrayal. One in Dimir colors. Like I said, it seems like Dimir gets all the good spells this set. It's a sorcery spell. Exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. As I said before, when they say all opponents, that means they want you to play this in Commander. You may cast those cards this turn, and you may spend mana still it was mana of any type to cast those spells. At the beginning of the next end step, if any of those cards remain exiled, return them to the opponent's graveyard, and then you exile the spell. Ooh, where do I begin? Oh my, this card is absurd. This is a really, really absurd card. I mean, wow. Okay, let's get started on this card. Now, this in EDH is absurd because mostly the decks that want to play this card are mill decks that mill the opponent multiple cards, and if you have a way to mill a lot of cards from your opponent, and then say have maybe a couple of mana rocks and such or mana creatures, and then have Paradox Engine, oh my, the stacking on that will be absurd. Cast a spell, untap the mana rocks, then cast another spell from another opponent, untap the mana rocks, and then just cast multiple spells from your opponent's graveyard. It's just, I can't wait to see somebody go off with this card. Now that we got to all the commander shenanigans that this card's going to provide, let's talk about limited. Is this card good in limited? Maybe? I mean, if you look at this as a free mana, hey, late game, I'm going to cast this and then cast one of your bombs that are in your graveyard, that might be the power of this card, but there are times where this is a dead card, so in limited, I'm going to go with an absolute maybe on this because it is really, really dependent on some circumstances and some board states and such. And cards that rely on that much variance, especially the variance of limited in general, it can be a very problematic card to play in limited. Let me put it like that. Now in standard, the potential's there. Especially since we're going to go into a meta where graveyard's going to matter a lot. There might be some people that use this as a sideboard card to help cast a specific bomb that comes from the opponent's graveyard, or be able to cast spells to help them interact with the battlefield. So that's something to consider. However, I don't know if there's enough to synergize with the fact that you have to spend free mana to do this. And then, once you spend the free mana to do this, then you have to spend the additional mana to cast that spell. That might be more costly for this meta in general. Maybe not, we have to wait and see, but overall, this card is just EDH play written all over it. It's absurd in EDH, especially in the right decks. I mean, oi, you're not gonna have a good day when somebody goes off with a spell and they milled most of your good stuff. Let me put it like that. Next up, and this one I'm going to read real quick because I do like this card. It's a 2-mana 2/2 Bolt Splicer Mage, blue and a red. It's a Verdalkin Wizard. And whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell that targets only this creature, if you control one or more other creatures that spell could target, you may choose one of them, copy the spell, and it targets the chosen creature. Overall, I think this might be a potentially very powerful card. I mean, we haven't seen all the pieces yet to make this card ridiculously absurd. But if we get enough red blue, kind of like Combat Trick or Give a Creature Haste or Give a Creature Flying, which we've seen already with Jumpstart even, there is a potential that you could make a blue-red kind of is it aggro deck where you use your Boltcaster Mage, Bolt Splicer Mages, and then get a bunch of better, like, cheaper creatures that might be a lot more better if you are able to give it flying or give it haste off free mana and such. I mean, the power level is there, especially the factor, like, some of those, even when you give it haste, you still give it a stat boost. Like imagine this. Okay, imagine this. So, like, let's say, for example, you cast this, and then you, on turn 3, cast just, say, a normal bear, and then, say, put, like, that one that gives target creature flying, or even just on turn 4, give target creature flying, target creature haste. Then you can give the other creature target haste and flying as well, and then get the stat boost, and then attack in. There's some janky shenanigans with this card. In Limited, it's a bear. If you need to play the bear, it's nice and it has a little bit of upside, but don't go totally crazy on this unless you have the really good pull. But in Standard, there's some shenanigans in some constructed formats that I really want to toy with this card. So, it gets my janky, oh boy, I can't wait to do some silly shenanigans with this card. Don't underestimate this card. It can be pretty silly in the right decks. Okay, and is that every card? I don't think so. I think we got one more. And this one I'm going to read too, the last card before we end this spoiler season reviews, before we get to the set reviews. It's the Pegasus Knight. 7 and a white for a human knight flying that has Convoke, and it's a 4-5. Honestly, just a great limited card. The fact that you can spend Convoke to make this out faster, 8 mana is a lot for a 4-5 flyer. But if you have creatures to help cast it, then the card becomes a lot better. However, in Standard, I don't see it at all. Not in a million years. But in Limited, you get your flyers if you need them. And if you're in a creature-centric deck where you have a lot of tokens or a lot of creatures, this spell becomes very, very powerful. So, because you could potentially in some decks get this out as early as turn 4, or even turn 3 in some circumstances, and that makes the power of this card in Limited potentially very powerful. Now, honestly, I think this is more beneficial in Sealed, maybe potentially beneficial in Draft if you can draft the token-style deck. But overall, great Limited card. I would be surprised if it sees constructed play. Though it is a Knight, so maybe in the Knight's deck, who knows, because it's a flyer that you can buff up with the Knight cards that are in currently Standard, so that's something to consider. I don't know if that's enough to make it see play, but it's a thought at the very least. It's a flying Knight, so who knows? And overall, that's all the cards that they revealed so far that I'm going to take a look at before the set reviews. Overall, this set looks like a pretty fun set to try out, and I can't wait to test with some very janky shenanigan cards. And with the set review, just as a quick note, I'm going to try a very different approach with the set reviews to try to make the videos really, really fast. As you've seen here with my spoiler reviews, I kind of went into detail trying to explain every potential format for this card. What I'm going to do is try a format where I'm going to take like a quick 3-minute look at each, not even a 3-minute, maybe just a 1-2 3-minute look at a card. Say 2 pros and 2 cons of the card, and then just provide a quick score of the cards in various formats. It's an experimental vein, and I'm still getting the kinks out of it before I would publish it, because I first need to see the full set review before I can even make one of these. But it's a thought that I have in mind. I might also just do the old style set review that I did before and just braze through it and know that the videos will be a lot longer than usual. But I will try to make these videos shorter than they have been, at least with my core set 2019 review. Overall, though, that's all my opinions on the set so far. Hope you all have a lovely day or night, depending on when you're watching this. This is LevDev, signing out.